How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Monitor Comics, the channel where we create comics and manga. In today's video, we're going to be discussing superhero fiction and superhero characters. If you are new around here, I'm a published manga artist with the company Saturday AM. Saturday AM is the world's most diverse manga anthology and is the home of many amazing creators like White Manga, Jay Odin, Blake Showers, and Venus Bambiza. In today's video, I'm joined by Markk, a super talented manga artist and YouTuber who has recently joined the Saturday AM lineup with his published series Metal Souls. Before Metal Souls, Markk worked on a superhero webcomic known as Iron Might. Markk has been a fan of superhero comics since childhood, so I thought he would be the perfect guest to bring on for today's comic making tutorial. Together, we will be giving you 10 tips for writing superhero comics and manga.
Hey, how's it going, y'all? My name is Markk, and I am an artist. More specifically, I am a manga artist, and as of now, I am the author of 2 one-shots and a currently running self-published series. The 2 one-shots in which I worked on are called Metal Souls, published in issue number 136 of Saturday AM, and Ruthless, a one-shot that I self-published on Webtoons. As for my self-published series, it's titled Iron Might. You can support me by following me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Simply put, a superhero story is one that involves a hero who is super. The end. Okay, I'm joking. That's not all it is. I would say that a superhero story is a genre of story that was widely popularized by comic books, and it's a story that examines/delves into the lives, adventures, the personalities, dilemmas, and the ethics of people who fight crimes known as superheroes.
Superhero fiction is a term used to describe the style of fiction writing that focuses on protagonists with superhuman capabilities. Usually the superpowered main character exists in a version of present-day Earth, only with carefully chosen fantastical alterations. An example of carefully chosen fantastical alterations can be seen in the Spider-Man franchise. In the Spider-Man comics and movies, science has advanced to the point of granting normal humans superpowered abilities. This can be seen through the radioactive spider that gives Peter Parker his powers, the alien symbiote Venom, and the Green Goblin serum that turns Norman Osborn into a monstrous murderer.
Now, as you've seen with certain characters like Deadpool or Spawn, the superhero genre can sort of be split into subgenres where you do things that almost sort of flip what we understand about superheroes on its head and not go the usual direction with protagonists of these stories and instead do things like having a morally ambiguous character. Taking these routes is why we have superhero subgenres, as I'll call them, where things like anti-heroes and straight up villains as the protagonists are a thing. I believe what makes superheroes popular, and not just the cool or fantastical aspects about them, there's also a sense of escapism too. Like there's a huge appeal when people who struggle with everyday life, or people who have daily troubles and deal with things like bullies, or a mean boss, or and wanting to get that girl, or even someone just wants to be appreciated and loved by people, peers, and others. These superhero studies offer that escapism to these people. They get to watch someone conquer all odds and fears and come out victorious, and there's an appeal in that. Examples of superheroes that can give this feeling to people are heroes like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, etc. Superhero stories can also be popular because they might do the opposite of what I just said. Some of them might mirror the human experience, and this makes them relatable and makes us, the viewer, want to root for them. Superheroes that do this well, are Spider-Man and Deku from My Hero Academia in literally only chapter 1. Deku from every other chapter, in my opinion, no.
To understand the popularity of superhero fiction, I want to analyze the history of superhero comics in the West, beginning with the Golden Age of comics. Many literary historians consider the Great Depression and World War II to be the Golden Age of superhero comics. Superman's debut in Action Comics #1 is often credited as the beginning of the Golden Age of comics. Superman's popularity helped make comic books a major arm of publishing, which led rival companies to create superheroes of their own. Some iconic superheroes that were created during the Golden Age include Batman, Wonder Woman, and Captain America. Superhero comic books during the Golden Age were very affordable, only costing 10 cents during the 1930s and the late 1950s. Audiences enjoyed the escapist plots that were commonly found in superhero stories. During these darker times in history, audiences craved superheroes who stood for justice and had good morality. The popularity and circulation of superhero comics declined following World War II. Comic books about horror, crime, and romance began overshadowing superhero fiction. However, controversy would later arise over the alleged links between horror and crime comic books and juvenile delinquency. In 1954, publishers implemented the Comics Code Authority to regulate comic content. As a result of these changes, publishers began introducing superhero stories again. This change began with the introduction of a new version of DC Comics' The Flash in Showcase #4 in 1956. This era from 1956 to 1970 would later be called the Silver Age of comic books. In response to strong demand, DC Comics began publishing more superhero titles, including Justice League of America. Around this time, Marvel Comics released the Fantastic Four #1 in response. Some important comic writers to emerge from the Silver Age include Stan Lee, Gardner Fox, and John Broome. Some influential artists to emerge during the Silver Age of comics include Kurt Swan, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Gil Kane. The Bronze Age of comics began in 1970 and ran until 1985. The Bronze Age retained many of the conventions of the Silver Age of comics, with traditional superheroes remaining the mainstay of the industry. However, a return to darker plot elements and storylines more related to relevant social issues began to flourish. There is no one single event that can be said to mark the beginning of the Bronze Age. A number of events beginning in the 1970s can be seen as a shift away from the tone of comics in the previous decade. For example, an issue of Green Lantern that released in 1970 by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams focused on poverty and self-doubt. Another example can be seen in 1973's Amazing Spider-Man number 121 and 122, where Spider-Man's longtime girlfriend Gwen Stacy is murdered by the Green Goblin. This event was a definitive Bronze Age event as it exemplified the period's willingness to kill off a long-established, untouchable character. One of the most significant developments during this period was the rise in the number of black and other non-white minority superheroes. Before the 1970s, aside from Black Panther, who was introduced in 1966, and Falcon, who was introduced in 1969, there had been very few non-white superheroes. Starting in the 1970s, characters like Luke Cage, Shang-Chi, Jon Stewart, Black Lightning, and Cyborg were created.
So I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and my family was poor. So when I was a kid, we rarely had power, so we couldn't watch TV most of the time, and we couldn't afford games or anything like that. But then one day, I remember finding like an old, OG Batman comic in a pile of junk from my neighbors. And I mean, it was torn up, but I remember it was a comic that had like OG Batman where he still wore like bright blue. And yeah, from then on, I think I got really into superheroes, and like I later got exposed to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie. And yeah, I guess I just became the biggest superhero simp. But yeah, my favorite superhero movies, comics, or whatever content and stuff is One Punch Man, the manga, and the anime, as well as Avengers Infinity War, the movie, and Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool.
My personal favorites include Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Batman the Killing Joke, Jeff Johns' Flashpoint, Marv Wolfman's Crisis on Infinite Earths, Robert Kirkman's Invincible, and Marvel Zombies. While I am much more up to date with manga, I will always have a soft spot for superhero comics. In the past, I have attended Keystone Comic-Con, Boston Comic-Con, and New York Comic-Con. I have signed art prints from iconic superhero artists like J. Scott Campbell, Mark McKenna, Jim Chung, and Neil Adams. With that being said, here are 10 tips for writing superhero comics and manga.
Off the top of my head, number one is an engaging protagonist. This person doesn't have to be the actual hero of the story. They can be the villain. That means they don't have to be likable per se. Just, engaging. You want them to be engaging enough to keep the audience's attention, to keep them watching or reading. Apart from this, a good protagonist in tandem with the antagonist pushes the story forward. A good protagonist shouldn't just have things happen to them. They need to make, decisions, choices, and actions that will contribute to the conflict and push the story forward. Examples of good protagonists in superhero stories are, Tom Holland's Spider-Man in his movies, more specifically No Way Home, and Mark Grayson from Invincible. Number 2. You need an even more engaging antagonist. If you ask me, an engaging antagonist is one that if you took the hypothetical camera and followed them/their story instead of the protagonist, the antagonist would be justified in their ideals and ways of thinking. You'd understand where they're coming from, so in turn, you would understand their actions. Not necessarily agree with them, but understand them. An example, in my opinion, of great antagonists in superhero stories are Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Joker from The Dark Knight. For the third tip, I already hinted at it, but it's conflict. A good story needs conflict, period. Whether it be superheroes or not superheroes, it doesn't matter. Good and engaging conflict that makes sense is a key ingredient for a good story. According to Wikipedia, conflict is defined as the challenge main characters need to solve in order to achieve their goals. So if you're looking for an example of good conflict within a superhero story, just Google any highly rated or critically acclaimed piece of superhero fiction, because I guarantee you, there's good conflict in there. Tip number 4, there needs to be a superpowered person or superhero or something like that in your story for it to be categorized as a superhero story. The difference between a hero and a superhero is one of them is super. So yeah, for your story to be within the genre of superhero, there needs to be one in it. They don't have to be the protagonist, but they need to be in it. An example of a show that does this well is The Boys on Amazon Prime Video. And also really quick, this is sort of like a tip 4.5, but yeah, if you can or want to, have cool, interesting powers or power systems within your work because that helps a lot. Notice I saved this part for last, even though one might think this is the first step in creating a superhero story, but yeah, no. At the end of the day, A superhero story is just a story with super people in it. So yeah, tell an engaging story first before focusing too much on the intricacies of powers. Unless the powers are heavily interwoven into the story, then you need to simultaneously build on both. An example of something that does this well is, the X-Men franchise. And lastly, tip number 5, there are no hard rules. You can take everything I just said and flush it down the pooper if you want and do as you please, because at the end of the day, how is anyone going to create anything new and unique if they adapt too closely to a formula?
Tip number 6, dramatic origin stories. Writers of superhero stories often spend a lot of time fleshing out how their protagonists attain their powers and why they have chosen their path in life. Some superhero origin stories are tragic, like that of Bruce Wayne losing his parents before becoming Batman. Others are more circumstantial, like the story of Peter Parker being bitten by a radioactive spider and becoming Spider-Man. In My Hero Academia, Izuku Midoriya is introduced as a kid lacking supernatural abilities. While he has no superpowers, Izuku is the only person willing to throw himself into danger to try and save Bakugo's life after he is held hostage by a supervillain. Izuku's superhero origin story is powerful. He's been a helpless child for his entire life. He has even been bullied by those around him with superpowers. Yet it's Izuku himself who was able to risk his life to save a life while every other superhero stood by and waited. This act of selflessness inspired the superhero All Might to go past his limits and save the day. Superhero origin stories don't always have to be dramatic, there are exceptions to every rule of course. But this is just something to keep in mind since it's been so successful in the past. Tip number 7, incorporating secret identities. In superhero fiction, it is common for many superheroes to lead double lives. Like Hannah Montana, they want to experience the best of both worlds. When Superman is not out saving the world, he is a newspaper reporter named Clark Kent. When Batman is not roaming the streets of Gotham City, he hides behind the character of billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. A superhero's quote-unquote normal persona includes a carefully formulated mix of similarities and differences from their heroic alter ego. In Miraculous, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir, Adrian is a charismatic high school student and fashion model. He is a bit shy and reserved. While he likes to have fun, he is often serious, obedient, and less lively due to his strict upbringing. If something makes him sad, he tries to downplay it, like his relationship with his father. Adrian thinks reasonably and expresses frustration when someone is being difficult or something goes wrong. As the superhero Cat Noir, Adrian lets his wilder side come out, being cocky and outgoing. Cat Noir is much more open and optimistic than his quote-unquote normal persona. Cat Noir says whatever comes to his mind and often makes jokes and puns. In an attempt to get Ladybug's attention, he often boasts and brags about himself. This difference in behavior is a result of the freedom Adrian gains to act however he wants outside of his normal life. Tip number 8, explaining superpowers. You do not need to explicitly explain how the power system in your superhero story works. In Stan Lee's graphic novel autobiography, he said that when the Hulk was created, they just said he was created by gamma rays and left it at that. They never explained what gamma rays were or how they worked. Audiences were willing to accept that because it sounded real and they didn't care that much. You don't need a 20-page explanation about how your superpowers work and all of the science behind it. It's okay if you know all of that, but your readers don't. It's always best to give less justification than more. Tip number 9, supersuit design. A superhero suit is important. It protects your character's identity, it physically protects them, and sometimes helps them use their powers. Superhero suits are what your character will become recognized by. Start by thinking about your superhero's powers and what sort of suit they might need. For example, the Human Torch is able to set his entire body on fire, so he requires a suit that is fireproof. Think of a character like Frozone from The Incredibles. Frozone has the ability to create ice and freeze moisture. His suit is white and teal, referencing the color of snow and ice. He always wears goggles to protect his eyes from the ice's harmful reflective rays. His special boots have soles that can materialize into ice skates, skis, or a disc to snowboard. These design choices may sound trivial at first, but all of these small details will help elevate your hero. Finally, tip number 10, power of the week. In episodic stories, most audiences can assume that the superheroes are going to emerge victorious at the end. However, the tension that comes from wondering how they are going to do it is what keeps them engaged. In your superhero story, you need to make the superhero the solution to their own problem. Your reader will know your hero's capabilities and the rules the heroes operate under. If there is something new that's introduced that they were unaware of at the start of the story, then the reader can feel cheated. During the 1970s and the 1980s, television writers would sometimes write themselves into a corner. They would need to come up with a quick solution for their superhero characters to get out of trouble. This was usually done by giving a superhero a brand new power-up in times of need. This occurrence would later be labeled as the power of the week and made a lot of superhero shows unwatchable. At your story's climax, when your hero is pushed against the wall, they have to use their own wits, skills, or brawn to resolve the conflict.
For closing thoughts, I'd just like to say, especially considering what the characters in superhero stories teach us most of the time, if you're watching this video and there's something you've always wanted to do and pursue, and the only thing stopping you or preventing you from doing that is laziness or fear, more specifically fear of the unknown, fear of failure, or uncertainty, take that first step. Because from my experiences, taking the first step, the leap of faith, is always the hardest part. Because remember, y'all, we all have one life to live. There's no second chances. Truck-san or Truck-kun isn't coming to take anybody to another world, so spend your time doing what you're truly passionate about or care about.
That's going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out some of my other comic making tutorials after you are finished watching this one. We've already covered a ton of cool topics like writing villain characters, creating shonen power systems, and world building tips for your comic, manga, and webtoon projects.
Thank you all for watching this video. Again, I'm Markk, and you can find me on pretty much every social media platform except Facebook with the handle Markk. Also, if you've never heard of me and you like the sound of my smooth, beautiful, buttery voice, and you also happen to like manga, anime, and cool art, stop by my YouTube channel and absolutely decimate the subscribe button. Also, I would like to thank my buddy and fellow artist MonitorComics for, giving me the honor of being a guest on his channel. I truly appreciate it. But yeah, manga nerds, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.